Call to order. Grace, please read the statement.
Welcome to the public meeting of March 5th, 2025 of the Township of Washington Planning Board. Adequate notice of the meeting was given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by the Board Secretary to at least 2 newspapers on January 3rd, 2025, and this meeting will be posted on the Township Bulletin Board, electronic message board, WCTV, and on the Township website.
Thank you, Grace. Move to the flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Councilman Ullman, perfect timing. We just started.
Good to hear.
All right. I just need to read this.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. Since the last meeting, there's a new member appointed by the town council on January 6th. Councilman Michael Ullman is a Class 3 member, and he was administered the oath of office by the town clerk. And his term is from January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2025. Next is roll call.
Mr. Carroll.
Here.
Mr. Murphy is absent. Mr. Polito.
Here.
Mr. Toole.
Here.
Mr. Toro is absent. Mr. Wojnarowski.
Here.
Councilman Ullman.
Here.
Mayor Calamari.
Here.
And Chairman Sabino.
Here.
Let the record reflect also in attendance are Attorney Lou LaMattina, Engineer Paul Azzolina is absent, Board Planner Joe Burgess is here, and Board Secretary Grace Kavish.
Thank you, Grace. Can you read the public portion?
To participate in the general public portion of the meeting, please click the link below to join the webinar. You will be asked to state your name and address for the record, and we ask that only one person speak at a time. This public comment portion is only for non-agenda items. Time is set aside later in the meeting to address questions or comments about current agenda items. If you are participating by phone, press star 9 to raise your hand and star 6 to unmute. At the end of the general public portion, no further general questions or comments will be accepted.
Thank you, Grace. Do we have a motion to open the public portion?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. There's no one in the audience. Grace, do you have anyone on Zoom?
No.
Okay, no comments this evening. We have a motion to close the public portion.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, on to new business. As we discussed the last time we met, Joe Burgess, I would invite Joe Burgess from Burgess Associates to come to this planning board meeting and provide us with an update on the master plan. But Joe's here this evening to go through the goals and objectives and answer any questions that you might have. Mr. Burgess?
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I've been meeting with the Master Plan Subcommittee for, I think we had 4 meetings so far.
Yeah.
4 meetings. We provided a lot of the background data that's required of every master plan, demographic information, socioeconomic data, information on existing land uses and land use patterns in the municipality, and environmental information. And then we started talking about the specific goals and objectives and what we want to see for this new master plan. Now, your last master plan had a series of goals and objectives, and if you've read our report dated February 14th, we do it a little differently. With each goal that we have an accompanying policy statement explaining why we have this goal and why it's important. And the reason we do that is, I work both sides of the table. I represent a lot of municipalities. I also represent developers, sit with a lot of boards where we review applications and hear planners testify. And the one thing I've learned after 40 years, it's not the planning board that uses the master plan day to day. It's the zoning board of adjustment. And the reason for that is that they're the ones that handle use variances, and a critical part of any use variance is not only the special reasons that somebody has to present, but whether or not there's a substantial impairment to the intent of the plan. And if the master plan doesn't clearly spell out what your intent is, the applicant's planners are going to tell you what the intent is, what the zoning board is told. And we want to make sure that the zoning board has as much information as possible so they understand what you're trying to say is the policy of the municipality. We so far have identified 14 specific goals. This list will get larger when, as the subcommittee and I finish the land use plan element itself, because then we'll get into some very specific issues. So far they're more general in scope, but we thought it was an appropriate time to sit down with the full planning board and explain what we've been doing. So that's the thrust of the way we write the goals and objectives. I'm not going to read 14 goals and policy statements to you, but I just wanted to highlight a few things as to why we're doing some things. As a precursor to the specific goals, we identified the purposes of the municipal land use law. Every master plan has that. Your previous master plan had that. I'm not going to waste time talking about that. That's fairly general. But then we start talking about some of a little more specificity. We talk about, for example, why we want to encourage an established single-family residential development pattern and why it's important because of the character of the community that we want to reinforce this established pattern and discourage any incompatible land uses that may be proposed. We spell out an associated policy statement as to why that is so significant. And the benefit of that is that when somebody goes before the the zoning board with a use variance for an incompatible use, they not only have to overcome the goal, but the specifics of in the policy statement, why that goal is important to the municipality. So it makes the process easier for the zoning board. It makes it much more difficult for the applicant. And our experience has been that doing it this way, we see a reduction in the number of use variances that zoning boards begin to hear. I think the most important one, and we have it in here, we have one goal that talks about discouraging two-family residential development. And we put that actually it was the Westwood master plan 20-some years ago. They had one end of town that was starting to see a lot of two-family applications. And it's a section of town with narrower streets, small lots. Zoning board was giving these away like candy. And people started to get upset. So we put this goal in. And before we put the goal in, we recognized that developers began to realize, hey, you could buy up a single family house, knock it down, we'll undoubtedly get another two-family on the lot and make some money. So all of a sudden they had a goal that said we want to discourage it. We explained why with the narrow streets and everything else, it was becoming a problem. And after that was adopted, there was another slew of applications on their agenda, and they denied them all because nobody could overcome that language. And all of a sudden, they weren't getting any more two-family applications. Emerson started to see more two-family applications, but that was Emerson's problem. I hope you didn't, but one of the consequences of that. Emerson then subsequently adopted the same goal. And we started to see a lot fewer two-families, in this region. We did the same thing for all these other goals. We have very specific comments about how we want to protect, provide separations between incompatible land uses with greater buffers, and we spell out in some detail what we mean by that. We just don't want to see a single row of plant material and they call it a day. We talk about double rows of plants, staggered arrangements to try to get better screening. We talk about fencing where there might not be enough room for a double row of staggered plant material. But we just give a little more specificity into the goal of the plan, so it makes it harder for an applicant to do something less than what the zoning ordinance would require. We have a lot more information in here regarding aesthetic improvements and enhancements that you just simply hadn't had before, and we thought that was important. One of the goals that some people in the subcommittee were talking about or concerned was the issue of flag lots being developed. So we have a new goal that talks about discouraging the creation of flag lots, and the associated policy statement talk about why we think this is an improper land use arrangement, because it for the most part, it hinders emergency service access. If you can't find the house because all they have is a very narrow driveway and the house is tucked behind another house, that could lead to a real problem. So hopefully, I don't know how many of these applications you have had, but hopefully, this would put a stop to that as well. We talk about environmental concerns as well, and we define what we mean by environmental concerns, including slopes of a certain percentage, C1 stream buffers and wetland buffers and the like. So, with that said, you will notice there are a couple blank squares. We're taking some photos to insert in here. I got to tell you, I haven't been happy with the photos the staff took so far. So we're now waiting for some nice weather to insert that into the final document. I'm going to assume everybody's read this and knows this inside and out. So I'll just ask now, do you have any questions on that?
Mr. Burgess, during the advisory committee meeting, I had made the comment on page 6 where it talks about the shopping center.
Yes.
Did you take that one sentence out? The last sentence was, this plan reaffirms the intent to limit any development on site to a maximum 2 stories.
Yes, actually, that sentence was to come out, but we haven't written the revision,
Okay.
an updated text. That will be coming out. There's a couple, there's one significant typo. I forgot to put the word "not" in something. You know which one I'm referring to? It's on page 4 of the policy statement under goal number 4. Midway down, it says, furthermore, given the array of housing types, the township, start above that. Consequently, the township's policy is designed to acknowledge the existing and established array of housing. It says, but to allow more multifamily.
Well, the knot is all the way to the right.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next to the white box.
It's not a knot. It's not a typo then. Never mind. Okay. So that takes care of that. One thing I do want to point out, the last goal talks about the state development and redevelopment plan. Now, since this was written, the state, who had promised us that we were going to see a new state plan back in March, they didn't finally give it to us until December, mid-December it was published, but no maps were attached to that publication. And I will tell you, the original state plan, which goes back, is dated 2000 or 2001. That was a 427-page document. They tried to update it in around 2015. It was a much more modest-sized document. Didn't go anywhere, was not even adopted. This new document that they published is about 50 pages. It's very general in scope. And when everybody was clamoring for the maps, that's the key. The maps historically have broken up the state into many different planning areas. For example, most of Bergen is in planning area 1, where it encourages greater development. And no maps are coming. So finally, they issued a statement just recently that said, there are no new maps coming. We're going to rely on the old maps. And I think they just gave up. They also made one significant statement, because I'm sure the zoning board again would hear it more often than you, that planners would stand before the zoning board and argue that, well, the state plan says this about your region, and usually they would just say, well, it talks about planning area 1, which is 80% of the whole county. So it encourages more development. So you give me a higher density or more development than I'm otherwise entitled to. They have now said that this is only an advisory document that you do not have to follow. It's up to it. In fact, even with the planning area mapping that they're keeping, local zoning will always supersede that. Recognizing what they've now said about the new state plan, it seems to carry no weight whatsoever. And so, we waited 2.5 years for the document to come out. It came out 9 months late, and now they're telling us it doesn't really carry any weight. So I might adjust that last item a little bit to reflect the new policy of the state. It's unfortunate because we all thought the state plan would carry some meat, and now it just doesn't. And it was also one of the reasons why we thought with the new housing numbers, which I'll get into later, that the state plan would have dealt with some of those issues that have become a problem, and it's not doing that either. And so thank our legislatures for all the hard work that didn't need to be done. We've established a schedule for the, are there any other questions on?
Yes.
Yes.
So on page 1, we have included the second paragraph. We've included a report. Is
Yes.
this the report, the master plan draft 1?
Yes, that was the first document.
So dated 11/4.
Yes.
So this is the current draft.
That's only just some of the background information.
Okay.
And I was going to devote a second meeting, to that information and accompanying it with a lot of other information with the second document that we'll be submitting shortly. I will tell you that we have a timeline of 18 months to do the entire document, and there are, don't hold me to the number, but I believe there are 7 different elements that we're going to be putting together. And that document number 1 is not an element, it's just some background information.
Okay.
But we've got 7 different elements on land use, conservation, open space and recreation, a vulnerability assessment, community facilities, and 1 or 2 others escapes me at the moment. And we have a very strict, that's the timeline. And the subcommittee is really holding me to it. I think I'm 2 or 3 weeks actually a little behind. And that was because we had to put everything aside for the housing element, fair share plan stuff that came up during the process. What I would like to, are there any other questions?
Yes, I have actually quite a few, so.
Okay.
The general objectives, so these come from the MLUL.
Correct.
Are each of these supposed to be addressed within the goals and objectives or goals and policies? So for instance, number 6, to encourage the appropriate and efficient expenditure of public funds. So how does that translate into the goals and policies that we see? Things like to encourage senior citizen community housing.
Some of that will be incorporated into the next step once we start, the subcommittee start putting together the plan itself, and say we decide to identify a site for senior housing. Some of the general goals from the purposes of the act, we might actually remove because they might not necessarily apply to us in the end, but we don't know that yet, so I just put them all in as like a placeholder.
Okay. On page 3, what's the driver when we talk about the policy statement to number 1, last sentence, the plan is designed to prohibit incompatible land use, encourage compatible building forms and building heights, and reinforce the intensities of the use recommended in this plan. It seems like we're really focusing on height and density for some reason. Is there a particular reason?
Yes, those represent probably the most critical elements of intensity of use. Density is obvious, but also building heights. If somebody were to come in and propose an 8-story building, for example, that would clearly be very impactful in the community and not something that would be consistent with the established development pattern. So that's why we're saying we want to maintain or encourage a compatible arrangement of densities and heights.
So we spent quite a bit of time reviewing the existing maps, and we did some work with setting up new zones.
Yes.
And a lot of that, or much of the time, was spent on building height, or a lot of discussion was spent on building heights. So if that's been incorporated into our sort of ordinances, isn't that sufficient, or is there a need to reinforce all of these items that we've already codified?
Yes, and the reason is that separate and distinct from the ordinances which implement the master plan recommendations, when a developer goes for a height variance, for example, if it's more than 10 feet or 10% above what's permitted by code, you go to the zoning board of adjustment for that larger height variance. And then they have to overcome the language of the statute that says you have to show that there's no substantial impairment to the intent of the plan. So by spelling out the intent is to encourage compatible building forms and heights, they have to overcome that language that historically has not been in your master plan. It's only, height regulations are only spelled out in the ordinance, but this is a statement of policy that somebody will now have to overcome when they seek a height variance.
Okay. And then continuing on page 3. The slope discussion, wetlands and floodplains.
Yes.
So have we identified those areas that, are impacted by this statement? So a 15% grade, trees with a caliper of 15 inches or clusters of trees. Have we overlaid this policy statement with a map of the town and where the geography, where this is applicable?
Yes, for slopes we have. We prepared a map identifying all slopes of, I believe it was 15 to 20%, 20% to 25%, and 25% and above. And it will be that will be in the master plan in the end. And we did it that way because a lot of ordinances that we write will often allow a certain amount of development to occur depending upon the steepness of slopes. So for example, anything from 0 to 15%, you can build on that. Once you get in that 15 to 20% range, you might allow a certain lesser percentage, and the steeper the property and more of it, the lesser amount of development you would allow on the site.
Do we know if we have vacant land that would be, this would apply to?
Yes, because we also have what's called an existing land use map, where we identify not only how all the sites in town are developed, but we also highlight those sites that remain vacant. And you shouldn't just focus on the idea of how it affects vacant sites, because there could be properties that are oversized. They have a house on it, for example, and but they have a lot of steep slopes in the backyard. So if someone, or on the side, and if somebody wanted to subdivide that property, we would want to know right up front, well, how much of that site can in fact be easily developed or not. And so the steep slopes show all of that. I will add that, these are generalized slope information. The applicant would be required to identify, as part of any development application, do an actual site survey to come up with all the topo on the site and identify the slope gradients that we put into the ordinance.
Okay. If we continue to page 4, goal number 3, I guess the question I have is encourage the design of open space features and development to abut the open spaces of adjacent properties where determined appropriate and feasible. Because I'm trying to understand what we're saying there, and then is the policy statement responsive to that? Because I didn't think it was, but perhaps I am not understanding the goal.
What we were trying to show is that where one is providing some open space feature, we should be looking at adjoining property to see if it connects to other open space designated property on adjoining lots. And in that way, we'll create like a band of continuous open space in the community. One of the things we talked about with the subcommittee is if that were to in fact create some significant contiguous open spaces, maybe you then want to talk about paths through that area for people to walk through. And if you didn't think the policy statement is directly on point, and I have to say when I read it in preparation for tonight's meeting, I tend to agree with you. I'm going to see how we could refine that language to more accurately reflect what that goal states.
Okay. In number 4, so it's the subcommittee's opinion that we should have no townhomes or multifamily dwellings? No,
other than what will be spelled out in the land use plan element.
So we will, in theory, adopt and is it an overlay? I don't know how that manifests itself. So
that's something we might want to hold off till we go into closed session, because that's where we start talking about not only multifamily development, but our affordable housing obligation and how we're going to address that. And we're going to do that as soon as we finish this discussion.
Okay. Just a few more. Page 5. So goal 6, to encourage and provide buffer zones to separate incompatible land uses. So is that incorporation, or are we saying physical space, or are we saying screening?
We're actually saying both. We say we want to encourage physical separations, and in the ordinance to implement this, we will identify whether it's a 10-foot buffer or 20-foot buffer, whatever the number will be. But we also recognize that there are times when you don't have that much space to provide a significant physical separation. So that's when we say it might need fencing as an alternative, but you're going to need something to separate out those incompatible uses.
And how is that, or what is the incompatible land use. So if someone goes for a variance for a setback because it doesn't meet the criteria of the zone, is that an incompatible land use and therefore they have to build fences, or is it
No,
a
this-
commercial versus a residential?
It's more about use rather than just a simple setback between one house to another, for example. But if you have a commercial use next to a residential use, then you want that physical separation and hopefully a decent sized landscape buffer.
Okay. Just page 6, the last sentence, the last paragraph. I don't understand the last, I guess, section or the last sentence. The township has concluded it is not necessary to encourage home occupations in the residential sections of the municipality. What, I mean,
The subcommittee had a lot of discussion about whether or not they wanted to allow home occupations in single-family residential neighborhoods. And in the end, the decision was to discourage it.
so,
Talking about
Me-
businesses tonight.
Yeah.
Run a doctor's
Yeah.
office in your house or a dentist's office in your house.
Yeah,
That's what they're talking
not if you're working in your,
Maybe that should be elaborated on in that paragraph.
I have no, so quite honestly, I'm not, maybe I'm not that smart, but
No, I-
I had no idea what a home occupation was.
oftentimes it starts off as, someone teaching kids out of their house, and all of a sudden it becomes a significant business where they're getting a lot of people coming to the house on a regular basis. I know one where I used to live, where there's a woman who, I thought it was great. She was a seamstress, for lack of a better word. It became a major impact on the neighborhood after a while because she had just this constant flow of people and vehicles and everything, which upset the neighborhood.
A suggestion, maybe you could put in that hobby-based business is acceptable, but anything that's more
More intense.
more intense, more
And-
real business.
And what I would do is I'll probably define hobby-based to make it clear as
Something that's
examples.
really not for, to sustain yourself monetarily, but something just,
I think I
something to do
understand
for
what you mean.
fun.
This is pretty general though. I mean, really, they included it's not necessary to encourage home occupations. I mean, it's not getting specific in any, so.
Yeah, well, you recognize this is just a broad policy, although I agree we could be a little more definitive. But it's when we get to the zoning ordinance to implement all these policies, that's where we get very specific.
Okay. Can I continue?
Yeah,
No,
please,
sorry.
please,
No,
please.
just,
Oh, please.
on page 7, number 10, we start out talking about a sideway and walkway master plan,
Yes.
and then go on to an ongoing program to clear out streams to facilitate water flow. Like,
Yeah,
That's
we
like a
talked about
bit of
that
a
with the
reach.
subcommittee. I put that sentence in the wrong section. That last sentence that you just referred to, that goes in another section.
Okay. And then, So the policy doesn't talk about the water flow, which it shouldn't.
Correct.
Okay. But then if we talk about the policy, who is defining these sort of areas, or, when are they defined? Because we've had people come before us that required planning approval. They don't have sidewalks in front of their house today, and, I think if we wanted them to, there would be a sidewalk to nowhere. It would be, 50 feet of sidewalk on a street that has none. So are we laying out sort of these walkway maps through
We
town?
are, there's a separate sidewalk element of the master plan that we're going to be preparing. And we talked about this at length. We are going to be identifying certain specific locations where we strongly feel that it should be done. And then there's going to be a catch-all statement or two about how, depending on certain characteristics, it may be appropriate, and it would be determined by the approving agency when they review the application. We also have a comment in here, which we'll carry through in that element, that talks about, if it's the sidewalk to nowhere, you can make a monetary contribution to a sidewalk fund, which will then be used to build sidewalks somewhere where it's necessary.
And can this policy, or can these statements not only be used when we talk about development, or individuals coming before the planning or zoning board, but can they be used as a lever for township activity? Or, so for instance, there's a school that has, issues with people walking in the streets. I'm assuming that might be a area where a sidewalk would be encouraged.
Correct.
And
Typically,
then, if it could be, can the township use that as a lever to sort of require the implementation of sidewalks?
yes, I will say that, where we've done this in the past, we typically start with schools and work from there. And for 2 or 3 blocks, we'll say, sidewalks are important. We will be identifying certain specific locations.
Okay. And that does not, by putting that overlay or by identifying it, it does not force an existing homeowner to go out and put in.
Correct, it would not.
Okay. The number 11, do we have any, I know we have, was it 7 chimneys or 5 chimneys?
I know at the subcommittee, there was some general discussion that people were saying, there's a house here or there, or, a few that might benefit from that.
And we'll identify those? Or they will be identified?
What we'll do is turn to the county, I forget the exact title of the agency. It's like a county historical heritage agency. And they have handbooks where they identify a tremendous number of buildings throughout the county. So we would go through that and identify it that way.
Okay. Just two more real quick. The number 12. So this one I'm a little confused with, because if someone feels the need to put in a development or redevelop something that is going to put a stress on community facilities, shouldn't we word it so the developer has a responsibility and not the township being responsive? I mean, don't we want to put, if they need a substation to pump sewage, I don't think we want to put the onus on the township to do that. I think we want to put the onus on the developer to
Yeah,
do that.
there is going to be a community facilities element to the master plan. And part of this is to get a good handle on community facilities needs. For example, I always use schools as the easiest example. If you're a municipality that's creating a lot of apartments, for example, or even single-family homes, we use our standard multipliers to figure out, okay, how many people are going to come out of all these projects and how many school kids. And then we turn to the Board of Ed, we'll get a lot of information about capacity in the school system, and then turn around and say, okay, so based on the capacity, we can accommodate X number of additional dwelling units before the schools are going to fill up and you need an addition or something. So at least you have that base information to work from, so you can see what kind of impact there would be on the school system. We use the same type of statistical analysis. There's data on, communities such as yours. How many police do you need per 1,000 people? The FBI statistics say, generally speaking, you need like one cop for every 500 people, I think it is. Don't hold me to that number, I might be wrong. But
I'll bring you to our budget meeting, so.
okay, but we use that information to say, okay, you may need 2 more police officers over time, something like that. So this way you get prepared for it. The kind of issue that you raised about the individual developer, if there's a need that they are generating on a large-scale project, you would require them during the site plan review process to provide for that. So it works both ways.
Understood. I guess, when I read the policy statement, the township is responsive to these changes and continues to offer appropriate facilities and services to meet the needs of its residents. I mean, when I read that as a councilman, I'm reading that we have to foot the bill.
No, this is more for the kind of public facilities that we're talking about, not the developer-generated infrastructure which they put in.
Okay.
And I could refine this language.
Gorga Police tried it. Remember? They made them do it.
I could refine that language to clarify that.
Okay. And I promised the last question.
Yeah, this is good.
Councilman, if I could just make one point. I mean, that topic actually came up with the Viano Gorga placing Franklin Court. Specifically Franklin Court, the height of the building, we don't have a fire engine, a fire truck that can get up that high to the 4th floor of that building. And we were told by legal counsel that we cannot require to go out and buy a $1.5 million fire truck.
That you can't require. That is true.
Yeah.
But that's why maybe somebody could have denied that 4th floor.
Remember Vladimir? When that
I
topic
do.
came up?
I brought that up because of the outriggers and everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can actually deny an application.
And that
Well,
would-
in that case,
yeah.
we couldn't because there was an agreement between the town and the
Okay.
developer to meet
Yeah.
round 3.
The,
Well, that's the other.
and that was a
thing.
number, that was a couple of years ago,
Since everything
correct?
goes out the door when,
Yeah.
Because I'm hearing it's over 2 million now.
With the fire truck? Outside.
Yeah, I was out down in western Morris County recently, and they were talking about choking on the price. And they had to buy one.
Had we delayed that fire truck, the
Yeah.
ladder truck, it would be 2 million now, where it was 1.5 just a couple of years
Yeah.
ago.
Sorry, Councilman.
Nope. I know I'm taking up a lot of time.
No, this
I'm
is
sure you're
good.
hoping to get through this quick. Number 13, on page 8, number 13, energy and renewable energy resource sustainable building practice. So can we enforce, like, do we have to, can we say this needs to be LEED certified, platinum, or what are we saying here?
There will be a sustainability element to the master plan. And this section will be identifying things that the municipality can do. And there's a lot of relatively inexpensive things that you could encourage to make everything more sustainable and productive that way.
But when we talk about sustainable building practices,
Well, part of it, for example, if I may, the orientation of a building. That alone, with the way where windows face, towards sunlight or not, you could design the orientation in such a way that you'll be getting a more sustainable aspect out of the building just by the placement of it on site. Something like that.
okay. Thank
That's
you.
it? Okay.
Thank you.
That was good.
Any
you
further
make up-
questions from Mr. Burgess? None?
Not of Mr. Burgess, but I'd just like to point something out that.
Please.
Number 12 on page 7, since the council is reviewing the budget right now, I appreciate if the Councilman Allman, the council rep to the board, would take this back to the council. And for those people who can't read it like we can, I just want to take a minute and read it. Provide and maintain a superior system of community facilities and services, including water and sanitary sewer utilities, fire, police, and other public safety services, public works and library facilities, and stormwater management. The policy statement says the township has an exceptional system of community facilities and services. It is one of the underlying themes of this plan to ensure that as additional development occurs and the community's demographic character evolves, the township is responsible to these changes and continues to offer the appropriate facilities and services to meet the needs of its residents.
If I may, because, one of the things this will involve is as a community ages, for example, years ago throughout Bergen County, when the average age was, in the mid-30s, nobody was thinking about senior housing. Today, the average age in the county is like in the mid-40s, and all of a sudden, every municipality is contemplating senior housing because the average age of the community has gotten that much older. So you'll be looking at your demographic characteristics to decide, well, given the changes over time, what will our needs be 10 years down the road? If we need senior housing, do we want to have more medical facilities? Or if we're having a younger group of people move into town, do we have to start thinking about more play space, for example? I'm giving broad generalities here, but that's what that section will be all about.
So we're looking at the planning board to lever and force the town and the council to provide for this. This will be a legal requirement that we have to.
No. These are broad policy statements saying, here's all this information.
Mhm.
Governing body, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. It's not mandating that, quite frankly, you do anything with it. But it gives you all the base information you will need for, the next 10 years to do planning.
All right, I guess then, Mr. Mayor Calamari, I know you called that out. What was were you looking for a specific item to be raised to the council?
To me, the ones that apply are fire, police, and public works. They all have some capital requests coming up. And I would just like the council to not necessarily go against what we're putting in the master plan, but work with the master plan and, budget accordingly for those departments.
Yeah.
But just to take it into account, I'm not mandating anything, but if it's going to be in the master plan,
If I could,
the council should work with the master plan also.
yeah, if I could cite one recent example in another municipality. We were talking about their volunteer fire department. And it turns out their volunteer fire department had an average age of like 63 or 67, I forget which. And they turned around and said, we got to start recruiting younger people. And, a few people in the fire department had always understood that because they saw it happening, but it didn't seem to be as well known or broadcast as it should have been. So when we brought it to their attention to a master plan process, all of a sudden they go, okay, let's really do an ad campaign to get younger people to start volunteering. It's things like that. That's the benefit of a good master plan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to, can I get a motion to open public comments?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one in the audience? Anyone on Zoom? Nope. We have a motion to close public comments.
So moved.
No second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We're going to close now?
You want to go into closed session now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And we have to come back. We have to come back
Yeah.
to do the other stuff.
Yeah, okay. Do I have a motion to go into closed session?
Motion.
Second. Will this require roll call or just all in favor? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Second, who seconded?
Aye.
You seconded, okay. All right, thank you.
Should I close the door?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, I have to.
Usually you have to say if we plan on coming back into public or not,
Yeah.
just so the
Yes.
public would know.
Uh,
Are we?
Yes, we'll be back into public session after the closed session is over.
Do we know how long?
Should be 15 minutes.
Okay, we'll be back in public session in 15 minutes.
I just wanted to give you some background.
24. Mr. Mayor, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next step is for that report to go to the mayor and council for discussion. Review.
I would say yes, and it's up to them if they want to discuss it or if they're going to just take it as written.
Okay, great. And then Grace, you probably need to get a copy of that report to Mr. Burgess to see if there's any impact on the master plan.
Okay.
Okay. Do I have a motion to open public comment on the 2024 zoning board annual report?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one in the audience? Anyone on Zoom?
No.
Nope. Okay. We have a motion to close the public comment section.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, old business, no old business. Next to the minutes. First minutes for approval is November 13th, 2024. Any comments? None? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Polito,
Yes.
Mr. Tool,
Yes.
Mr. Wojciechowski,
Yes.
Councilman Ullman,
Yes.
Chairman Sabina.
Yes. Next minute is December 18th, 2024. Any comments from my fellow board members? None? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. Roll call?
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Polito,
Yes.
Mr. Tool,
Yes.
Mr. Wojciechowski,
Yes.
Councilman Ullman,
Yes.
Mayor Calamari,
Yes.
Chairman Sabina.
Yes. Last minute, January 2nd, 2025. Any comments from the board members? None? Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion?
I'll second.
Roll call?
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Polito,
Yes.
Mr. Tool,
Yes.
Mr. Wojciechowski,
Yes.
Mayor Calamari,
Yes.
Chairman Sabina.
Yes. Okay, that's the minutes. Before we close, any comments from the board? None? None? Okay, I thought it was a very good meeting. And we're progressing on the master plan, so all is well from my perspective. With that, we have a motion to adjourn.
Well, I just have one question. The housing plan that was mentioned?
Yep.
Is that something that we need to start addressing, or is that something he's going to be, how's that going to work?
Mr. Burgess is going to present the recommendation
All right,
and work in conjunction with the mayor.
okay.
And then we'll present at a future board meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. All right, gentlemen,
Who's that?
thank you. So that you're aware.